Fixtures and Chattels by Dylan Ellis. The definition of land. Under Section 205, subsection 1(9) of the Law of Property Act 1925, land includes both buildings and parts of buildings. Conveyances of land. In the absence of any contrary intention, under Section 62 of the Law of Property Act 1925, a conveyance of land is deemed to include all buildings, houses, and fixtures on the land. Fixtures. Since fixtures form part of the land in a conveyance, sellers are required to leave anything that constitutes a fixture behind, or they will be in breach of contract. A fixture is an item of personal property which has been attached in such a way that it becomes part of the land. Fixtures are realty. They constitute parts of buildings and therefore fall within the definition of land under Section 205. A fixture will pass to the purchaser upon sale of the land. Fixtures can be removed up until the time of exchange of contracts for sale, but cannot be removed between the time of inspection of the property by the prospective buyer and the exchange of contracts for sale. This is clearly illustrated by the case of Taylor and Hamer. In this case, the seller removed some flagstones from the garden after the buyer's first inspection, but before the contracts were exchanged. It was held that the seller had to either replace the flagstones or pay for substitutes. Chattels. A chattel is an item of personal property which retains its independent character as personalty and remains separate from the land. Chattels are personalty and do not fall within the definition of land under Section 205 of the LPA. Chattels are independent of the land and can be removed at any time before sale by the owner. The significance of the distinction between fixtures and chattels. Under the definition of land in Section 205 of the LPA, land includes not only the land itself, but also any buildings or parts of buildings on the land. A fixture is part of a building and as such will pass to the purchaser upon sale of the land. A chattel, however, does not form part of the land under Section 205 and therefore will not pass to a purchaser of land. The distinction between what constitutes a fixture and what constitutes a chattel is thus a pinnacle point of law, as it will determine which items the seller is obliged to leave behind for the purchaser and which can be removed by the seller in a sale of land. This is also an issue in the context of succession between heirs and executors, and in the context of mortgages between mortgagors and mortgagees. Latin maxims. Superficie solo sedit. A building becomes part of the ground. What this maxim effectively means is that a house or structure or other object, including plants and trees, that cannot be removed without damage or destruction, is presumed to form part of the land. This principle can also apply to the property of one person placed on the land of another. For example, a tree belonging to one person, if planted in the land of another person, belongs to the ground it takes root in, and therefore to that other person. Or, if a man built on another man's land, the building becomes part of the property of the owner of the land. Qui quid plantata solo sedit. Whatever is attached to the land becomes part of it. Whoever owns the piece of land also owns the things attached to it. What this principle means is that the mere annexation of a personal chattel results in it becoming part of the land itself. These principles can be traced back to the Roman doctrine of accessio, the process by which an item of one's personal property becomes inseparably incorporated into the property of another. Two tests exist to distinguish between fittings and chattels. These are the degree of annexation test and the object of annexation test. Whilst both tests remain valid, it was stated in Hampton Bygrave that the prevailing test is the object of annexation test. The degree of annexation test. The greater the degree of annexation, the more likely an object is to be deemed a fixture. Holland and Hodgson, looms bolted to the floor of a mill were held to be fixtures. Blackburn J. said, an article which is affixed to the land, even slightly, is to be considered part of the land unless the circumstances are such as to shew that it was intended all along to continue a chattel, the onus lying on those who contend that it is a chattel. Also, in air-cool installations and British telecommunications, air conditioning equipment bolted to the side of a building was held to be a fixture. Where the article in question is not physically attached to the land but merely rests upon its own weight, it is generally considered to be a chattel. In Holman Brigham, some heavy printing machines resting on their own weight attached however to a belt and driving mechanism, which itself was attached to the property, were held to be chattels, as they could easily be disconnected from the driving mechanism, and despite their weight could easily be removed. Seen in Andrews, a large greenhouse bolted to a concrete base which stood on the ground but was not fixed to the ground was held to be a chattel as it rested upon its own weight and was not sufficiently annexed to the ground. The general maxim of the law is that what is annexed to the land becomes part of the land, but it is very difficult, if not impossible, to say with precision what constitutes an annexation sufficient for this purpose. It is a question which must depend on the circumstances of each case. However, the degree of annexation test is not necessarily determinative as to whether the article is a fixture or a chattel, since it has been held that the second test, the objective annexation test, holds more weight, and that whilst a prima facie inference can be drawn from the degree of annexation test, the paramount test is nowadays the objective annexation test. The objective annexation test. This test looks at the purpose for which the article has been annexed. If the object was attached to the land to make a permanent improvement to the land, or the object was an integral part of the property, it would be a fixture. If the object was attached to the land simply so that it could be enjoyed or because that was the only way it could be used, it could still be a chattel even though it was firmly attached to the land. It is best illustrated by the contrasting cases of R. E. Whaley and Lay and Taylor, both of which concern tapestries. R. E. Whaley. In this case, the house was a complete specimen of an Elizabethan dwelling house, and the purpose of the annexation of the tapestries was to make an Elizabethan room and create a beautiful room as a whole. The tapestries were therefore held to be fixtures. However, in Lay and Taylor, tapestries were tacked to canvas. The canvas was then nailed to strips of wood, which were then nailed to the walls. The tapestries could be removed with a slight disturbance to the walls, but it was held that they were never intended to remain a part of the house, which was evidenced by the method of their attachment, and that they had been put up for the purpose of ornamentation and the better enjoyment of them as chattels. The degree of annexation was merely what was necessary for the display of them as tapestries. They were therefore deemed to be chattels. The greater the damage done upon removal of an object, the more likely that object is to be a fixture. If the attachment is such that significant damage is incurred upon removal, this may also indicate the intention that when the object was installed, it was intended to have some sort of permanence and be a lasting improvement. In Lay and Taylor, the fact that they could be removed without damage, other than removing the nails from the wall, and the nature of their slight attachment resulted in them being classified as chattels. In Berkeley and Poulet, pictures affixed to walls were held to be chattels on the basis that the panelling of the room was Victorian and the pictures were a mixed collection, unlike R. E. Whaley. Pictures were not part of the effect of the room or intended to be improvements to the land, but were hung on the wall for the better enjoyment of them as paintings. The case also concerned a marble statue weighing half a ton which rested on its own weight, sitting on a plinth which was fixed in place, and a sundial resting on a pedestal. The plinth was held to be a fixture as it was an integral part of the overall architectural design of the house. But the statue on top of it was held to be a chattel, as it could be removed without damage to the plinth, it could be changed subject to taste. The sundial was also held to be a chattel as it could be removed without damage to the pedestal and was only placed on the pedestal for better enjoyment of it as a chattel. Even if an article is not physically attached to the land and rests upon its own weight, if the purpose of the article was to be a lasting improvement to the land, it will become part of the land and therefore will be a fixture, as in Danecourt and Gregory, where some marble statues of lions, seats, and garden vases, resting on their own weight, were held to be fixtures as they formed an integral part of of the overall architectural design. Both R.E. Whaley and Danecourt and Gregory indicate that if the purpose of the object's annexation was to be a lasting improvement to the land, or was part of the overall architectural design, they will become fixtures. In Holland and Hodgson, Blackburn J. provided an analogy to blocks of stone. He said that blocks of stone placed one on top of the other without any mortar or cement for the purpose of forming a dry stone wall would become part of the land. Though the same stones, if deposited in a builder's yard and for convenience sake stacked on top of each other in the form of a wall, would remain chattels. On the other hand, an article may be very firmly fixed to the land, and yet the circumstances may be such as to shew that it was never intended to be part of the land, and then it does not become part of the land. In Botham and TSB Bank plc, a bath, toilet, bathroom fittings, kitchen sink, and units were held to be fixtures, not only due to the degree and purpose of attachment, but in the case of the bathroom fittings, on the basis that they were necessary for the use of the room as a bathroom, and were intended to be lasting improvements. The curtains, carpets, and light fittings, including lampshades and chandeliers, gas fires, which rested on their own weight, attached to the gas supply only to be usable, and kitchen appliances, such as washing machines, dishwashers, and cookers, were held to be chattels, as they could be removed without damage, and were only attached for the better enjoyment and use of them as chattels. However, according to this case, carpet tiles stuck to the floor are fixtures. Roche L.J. commented, "If the item viewed objectively is intended to be permanent and to afford a lasting improvement to the building, the thing will have become a fixture. If the attachment is temporary, and is no more than necessary for the item to be used and enjoyed, it will remain a chattel." In British Economical Lamp Co. Limited and Empire Mile End Limited, light bulbs were held to be chattels. Other tests and factors that the court will consider. In an attempt to make clear to the buyer which items, fixtures or chattels, will be included in the sale and avoid such situations as that of Taylor and Hamer, sellers are required to fill in a fixtures, fittings, and contents form prior to the exchange of contract. The form provides an extensive list of items and requires the purchaser to state whether they are taking them or leaving them. This list forms part of the contract to provide certainty as to whether the buyer is entitled to the items upon sale. In Elitestone and Morris, Lord Lloyd made two defining statements which help distinguish between fixtures and chattels. These tests are less useful when one is considering the house itself. In the case of the house, the answer is as much a matter of common sense as precise analysis. A house which is constructed in such a way to be removable, whether as a unit or in sections, may well remain a chattel, even though it is connected temporarily to main services, such as water and electricity. But a house which is constructed in such a way that it cannot be removed at all, save by destruction, cannot have been intended to remain a chattel. It must have been intended to form part of the realty. If a structure can only be enjoyed in situ, and is such that it cannot be removed in a whole or in sections to another site, there is at least a strong inference that the purpose of placing that structure on the original site was that it should form part of the realty at that site, and therefore cease to be a chattel. Elitestone and Morris concerned a chalet bungalow resting on its own weight on top of some concrete foundation blocks in the ground. Despite the bungalow not being attached to the ground, the fact that it could not be removed without destroying it resulted in it being found a fixture. In this case, the House of Lords stated that a common-sense approach should be taken, and that taking such an approach, the bungalow was part and parcel of the land, and the fact that it was not physically attached to the land was irrelevant. Lord Lloyd went on to state that the traditional twofold distinction between chattels and fixtures could be confusing, and cited per curiam the threefold classification set out in Woodfall, Landlord, and Tenant. An object brought onto land may be A. a chattel, B. a fixture, or C. part and parcel of the land itself. Objects in categories B and C are treated as being part of the land. Following this common-sense approach, in Chelsea Yacht and Boat Co. and Pope, a houseboat was held to be a chattel as the mooring ropes could be undone, allowing the boat to be removed without damage. New in Tristmere, a pair of houseboats were held to be chattels despite the fact that they rested on wooden panels, supported by wooden piles driven into the seabed. They had been connected to the main services providing water, gas and electricity. Their condition had deteriorated and moving them would result in damage or destruction. But when they were initially placed on the platform, they could have been moved off the platform and moved somewhere else without destruction. And being houseboats were designed to be mobile despite their current condition, leading the Court of Appeal to come to the conclusion that they were chattels. In addition to the degree and object of annexation tests, Roche Lj in Botham and Oars and TSB Bank plc identified several other factors that the court take into account when deciding whether an object is a fixture or a chattel. These are whether the article is part of the building's overall design, the ability to move the item without damage to the fabric of the building, whether the item is owned by the landowner or someone else, the type of person who attaches or installs the item, and the lifespan of the object itself. Intentions of the seller. The label that parties assign the article is not conclusive of its status. As Lord Cockburn said in Dixon and Fisher, no man can make his property real or personal by merely thinking it so. The seller's subjective intentions are not taken into account by courts, as the seller will inevitably try to assert that the object is a fitting so that they are able to take it with them. However, objective intentions of the seller may be taken into account. For example, in Hampton Bygrave, some heavy statues and urns secured only by their own weight were found to be fixtures on the basis that they were mentioned in the particulars of sale. During negotiations, the seller had offered to exclude them from the sale and reduce the price, indicating that the seller had considered them to be part of the land. The seller had also authorized his solicitor to state that the garden furniture was included in the sale and the items were still on the land at that time. Thank you for watching.